Yeah, that's the easiest way. All right, guys, how y'all doing? Steve Taubman here, and I'm here with Kel Rossiter from Adventure Spirit Guides. This gentleman has been introduced by a mutual friend, our friend Bill Atkinson. Awesome guy. Bill's been a friend for a while, and he's ex-Navy SEAL, swim instructor, motivational speaker, trainer, dude, and just an all-around nice guy. And he recently got in touch with me and said, "You've got to meet this guy, Kel." And so we've had a couple of interim conversations before actually meeting here online, but this is our first opportunity to really chit-chat a little bit. So, hey, Kel, how you doing?
Doing well. You pushing it forward day by day, kind
Right?
of like
Okay.
everybody is these days. You know, it feels a lot like climbing a mountain.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Like, how is it like climbing a mountain, and what do you know about what have you learned from climbing mountains that would prepare you better for what we're all going through now?
Well,
How's that for an opening? Yeah,
I guess it's been a lot of things, and at some level, climbing for me is definitely the way that I view life in general. But at the same time, I guess also some of the analogies may seem a little cliche, but I'll go with it because this is really how I see things and how I approach it. Yeah. And I think it's been a bit of a progression over the course of the last, say, 6 weeks, yeah, however long it's been. And I think the first part of it for me was tapping into what I call frog style mountaineering. Okay. And it's been a concept I've had for a while now of, when different people think about mascots, when you look at any high school mascot or any, right, team mascot, it's always like something that's got like claws or a sharp beak or, some kind of really mean animal. And I've always thought that like the mascot for a mountaineer should be a frog, because like a frog is the perfect alpinist. A frog is the picture of calm when there's nothing to do. It just like sits there on its lily pad and it waits, kind of like as we've all sort of been in our houses, right, and maybe not used to this life where there's much less going on. That's a lot like the mountain world, where you're in a tent, and you don't have control over this outside environment, the weather, et cetera, et cetera. And our impulse is always to think about like, how can we, do something or change something or things of that nature. Right. In fact, so, that's like the frog that's sitting there on the lily pad, kind of thinking, a frog, I think, is just a picture of calm. They're not thinking, oh, when is this fly going to come? Am I going to be able to tackle this fly when it gets here? It just kind of sits calmly and it waits. And but then when it is time for action, when there is something productive to do, right, that's when the frog is all action. It just like goes for the fly, it gets it, and then it can go back to being calm. So I think that was the first kind of concept I went into it with, was just that idea of sort of understanding the things understanding when it's useful to try to do things and when it's useful to just sort of be calm and adapt to the new environment.
I love that. I mean, that's a great place to start. And, it's that sense of curiosity and patience and just beingness without the frenetic action that gets you nowhere anyway.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think we've all, probably been reading way too many news articles and things like that of like, sort of this frenetic attempt to understand what's going on and all of that, which is important to stay engaged. But at a certain level, you can begin spinning your wheels. And I think that's a lot. I've really valued a lot of my tent time in climbing, because I think it's transferred well to this world now, where I sort of need to understand the things I can change and the things I can't change, and to understand when it's important to sort of like take action and when it's important to just kind of be calm and stay calm. So
You know what occurs to me that's really interesting? I never thought of it this way until you said it that way, is that when you get to that choice point where it's like, I don't have to do anything, then the thought might be, well, I could be calm since I don't have to do anything. But in essence, you have to be calm. It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
calm is as much of an imperative when you're supposed to be calm as action is when you're supposed to be in action. And I think in the
But yeah, no, of
mountaineering
course,
experience, if you're
right.
like being in action when you're supposed to be calm, I can imagine that could be a very dangerous thing.
Well, that's the thing is like I've seen it quite often, and I've probably done it in my own life in climbing as well. But what happens is, okay, you've been working so hard to get up, say, a classic climb where you
Mm,
might see this happen is Denali,
okay.
because on Denali, people have been working toward that for many, many years, and they have to arrange their essentially their life as far as work schedule, family schedule, all of that to
Right.
get the time it takes to go climb Denali, because that tends to be about let's say about a 3 week or more time period. So they've invested a lot of time in it,
Right.
in terms of the actual 3 weeks, but also the preparation. They've invested a lot of emotional energy in it in terms of the training and the sort of, I guess, maybe sort of working out the arrangements with their family, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
then they've arrived at this place and they start climbing Denali. And let's say they get up to 14,000 foot camp or 17,000 foot camp, and suddenly a big storm comes in. Typically, the kind of person that wants to climb Denali is a pretty motivated person. Like they've always, everything in their life has always been about kind of like doing things to achieve things. And then
Right.
suddenly they're confronted with an environment where doing something actually involves doing nothing, or meaning the most productive thing you can do is accept that there is nothing to be done.
That's
So to
awesome.
sort of to to uh, to to sit in that tent and just be,
Yeah.
and of course that can be very difficult. It's difficult for everybody. It's difficult for me, but I think it can be very difficult for people that have sort of this achievement orientation in life, and they've never experimented with other forms of being, I guess.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's when the little wheels in the mind start to spin, and they're like, oh my gosh, do you think the weather will clear? What if the weather doesn't clear before, I have to be back home in another 10 days, and I've
Right.
worked so hard to get here. And oh my gosh, do you think I've climatized enough? And what if, and they fall apart. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's intense. And then, then you have the people who are, who will, against all ration and reason, are going to go out there and get themselves killed, trying to do that last part, as opposed to the person who learns, you
yeah,
know, my strength is in my ability to adapt to my current circumstances.
right.
I love
Yeah.
the stories, even though I feel terrible for the people who have had to live them. The stories of people who have like been summiting Everest and then they have to stop like 200 feet from the top and go back.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing that somebody would have the discipline and the rigor to be able to say, this has been my goal my whole life, and I could see it from here. And the smartest thing I could do right now is go the other way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not to not to delve into the Everest literature, because I actually this is the time of year. It's almost May. So
Yeah,
normally, if this were a normal year,
right.
everybody, or at least in the public mind, would be focused on Everest. I think the more you get into climbing, the more
Hmm.
you realize there's much beyond Everest. But
Yeah,
the sort of the public mind seems to be, seems to focus on Everest.
right, right. Yeah.
And there is an amazing story of, this was back in that very same year that John Krakauer had done Into Thin Air.
Hmm.
And there was sort of one small side story into Thin Air about this Swedish guy, Goran Kropp. And he'd actually ridden his bicycle all the way from Sweden, and he had gone up to climb Everest, and he had gotten, I don't know on his summit attempt how close he had gotten, but let's say quite close. And
Okay.
he realized it wasn't going to be safe, and he turned around and he came back down to base camp, and that was going to be his only attempt. And I sort of thought, wow, that's amazing power of judgment and self-control that
Right.
you rode your bike from Sweden and then you got there and you decided it wasn't safe to continue. He
Mm-hmm.
came back down. The happy ending to that story is he actually did have enough energy and resources to sort of reconvene and go back up and summit. And then he rode his bike, by the way, he rode his bike all the way back to Sweden. But I think that kind of thing is amazing. And that's what makes climbing so interesting for me is I think it does call us to make interesting choices and
No doubt, no doubt.
difficult choices.
I mean, it's the ride back. I would have definitely taken an Uber at that point.
Yeah. Well, I know that's the amazing thing about that fellow that I find is so incredible. It's like, sure, you ride your bike from Sweden to Everest, and then you climb Everest, but you would sort of think, okay, yeah, then you celebrate, and you want to get on a jet and go home and be like, look at me.
Right.
Yeah, but he got on his bike and he rode.
Because you had that sense of kind of the completion of a process, the completion of a journey is you go there and then you come back, right? Like the Odyssey, you've got to have the whole experience all the way through. And the discipline that it takes when you clearly at that moment are thinking, okay, I've done enough. I've already hit the pinnacle of this thing. I don't need to do any more, but I'm going to anyway.
Yeah.
For me, because we're going to bring this back, I think I'd like to bring it back anyway to what it's a metaphor of. And I was thinking in my life, I went to chiropractic college. I became a chiropractor. I had a big practice, sports medicine practice, ran the practice for 14 years, and then decided I was done. I didn't want to do it anymore. There was no real pressing reason. I mean, I was successful from a financial standpoint, but I decided to let it go. And the general sense from people who knew me was, you've invested so much.
Sure.
Why don't you keep going?
Yeah.
And to me, it was kind of like that Everest thing. It's like, I invested so much and it got me to right here, and right here is perfect, and right here is a time when I'm supposed to go do something else. Right. And in retrospect, I'm thrilled that I did, because my life became what it is now as a speaker and an entertainer and all the other cool stuff. Right. It never would have happened if I stayed on that path.
Yeah.
So I think it's that the sense of detachment. You're not so attached that you've got to, keep going, or that you've got to be exerting effort, or you've got to, finish what you started. Yeah, it's nice if you can, but it's also nice to maintain a connection to your own sense of judgment.
Yeah. Well, and, I think that also taps into that idea of like education and experience as something that should open doors versus channel you. And like in your case, you'd worked real hard and invested significant time and financial resources in the chiropractor
journey,
the journey there, the path. And at some level, it sounds like, and I think this is the common interpretation, would be sort of that idea of like, well, that's the path you've invested so much on. Why aren't you continuing down that very specific path? But I think the whole idea of education and an experience is it's supposed to open up opportunity.
Yeah, that's
and if you're allowing it to like channel you down a path, it's been counterproductive.
I love that you said that. Yeah, and that's what when I started bringing it up, I'm glad you brought it back to that point. The point of, you don't want it to limit your choice. It's like it is a new choice, right? You've done all this work so that you have a choice you wouldn't have had before. But to be able to say, well, therefore, I've got to like walk that path all the way to the finish line. No, I don't think so.
Right. Yeah. Which I guess in terms of not that everything has to be interpreted through the climbing lens, but I think there's that idea of in climbing, I always have this idea that the plan is the point from which we deviate, which is to say you got to have a plan,
right?
But you can't cling to the plan. Like the plan is just sort of this point you have in mind, and then you deviate from it as the circumstances dictate. And it sounds like that's what you've done in your life, which is,
definitely. And I think, for me, and I'm sure that I want to hear your point of view about this, but for me, that's what's prepared me for navigating the experience of the pandemic, right? It's like, I was doing this and now I'm not doing that anymore. And now I'm at this point where I'm not exactly sure what the next step is, but I'm being
Yeah.
responsive to what is,
Yeah.
and I'm not fighting that reality. So I'm curious, like, what's your takeaway in terms of where we are as a society, as a world right now, and
Yeah.
what do we have to learn from this? What do we have to learn from all of
Yeah.
our weird experiences?
These are big questions, but yeah, ag- again, I tap back into some of what I feel like I've experienced and learned in the mountains,
Yeah.
and that idea of dealing with ambiguity. And a lot of times in climbing, you're sort of going up a glacier. So, so a glacier, the big mass of snow,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the glacier, there's crevasses, the big
Mm-hmm.
cracks of snow.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is if you're going up the glacier, if you're standing on it like this,
Mm-hmm.
you can't really see a lot of the cracks, and
Right.
so you're sort of like a mouse in a maze at some point, or in some cases where you look at the glacier, say
Right.
the day before, you try and get the best view on it you can, and you
Yeah.
sort of think, yeah, we're going to go to the right, and then we're going to go to the left, and then we're going to swing back hard to the right, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And then you actually get on the glacier and you start walking, and then because you're on this flat perspective, you can't see that perspective,
Yeah.
and you begin walking up, and suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, there's a crevasse right here. um, okay, let's try going to the right, and you begin walking, and you're sort of like, oh gosh, I hope this is going to work out. I'm not sure. And it's almost like, I always think of it at some level of, I don't know if you ever read those little books where it's kind of, you read what do they call those, storybooks? You basically, you read and it says, if you're going to
Is it?
the books that let you decide the next
Yeah, you're right.
step or
Right. Yeah.
something
Okay.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. I lost
I
it.
know what you're talking
Yeah,
about. I don't know if
yeah,
I've ever read them, but I've heard about that.
yeah.
So it's almost
So
like you get to choose like the trajectory for the next.
right, and
Okay.
and that's kind of like it, in those circumstances where suddenly you're shut down by a crevasse, but then you think, okay, well, let's try going to the left, and suddenly something opens up that you never anticipated opening up, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, yeah, right now to me, life feels a lot like traveling over a crevasse, not a crevasse, a glacier,
Yeah.
and kind of thinking, yeah, there's a lot of obstacles, and there's a lot I don't see. There's some I do see. There are paths through it. Not quite sure exactly what that's going to look like,
Right.
but trying to put that path together.
So
So
if you were somebody who had spent a long time building a business, right, developing a business, and now let's say you owned a restaurant, and now it's been closed for a while, and you've been losing money left and right, and you're not even sure if you're going to be able to open that restaurant back up again. How would this mindset, like, what would you do with that sense of uncertainty at this point, and ambiguity, and perhaps failure, as we define failure?
right. I mean, I don't know anything about,
By the way,
say,
I have to just take
the
a quick view.
yeah.
That's Woody back there.
Oh, okay.
He's,
All right.
that's what that noise is. He's
Yeah.
scratching himself a
Okay.
little nest.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Um, Although I waited a lot of tables in my 20s, I do not know anything about the restaurant world or so many of these other businesses that
Right,
are
right,
challenged. But hey, you and I both,
yeah.
because our businesses so much involve people to people
People.
contact and that kind of thing, we're dealing with these challenges now of like,
Absolutely.
what does that path forward look like? And I guess for me, in terms of say how the climbing mindset or the mountain mindset is influencing the way I'm thinking about things, I think for starters, just that idea that well, initially, in terms of just managing the personal risk of this, say a couple weeks ago, I sort of felt like the idea that in situations where there's greater uncertainty, in
Mhm.
general, the principle is dial back the risk. So for instance, if you're a mountain traveler, say a backcountry skier or a ski mountaineer,
Right.
and you are encountering a new snowpack, like you just arrived in a place like British Columbia or something,
Mhm.
and it's a snowpack that you haven't been skiing yet, and that sort of thing. And there was a new storm that came in, and it's not clear whether the new storm snow fell on top of a weak layer or not, et cetera, et cetera. That would be a lot of uncertainty. So you sort of dial back the risk, and that's definitely been kind of the experience of COVID. Is like, wow, we all have so many of these things we don't know, and so the response is, okay, we dial back the risk, we stay in our houses, we try to limit our, our social interactions directly anyway, that kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
And so to me that seemed like an appropriate response.
Yeah.
And now, um, we need to start thinking about, okay, well, what will that path look like going forward? And I guess for me, in terms of in terms of climbing,
Yeah.
I always believe in the idea of kind of plan A, plan B, plan C,
Uh-huh.
and then more if you can. But A, so you can't only have a plan A. And then plan B, you want plan B to look really attractive so
Mhm.
that you're not clinging to plan A as your only option.
Oh, that's
So,
cool. Yeah.
so always having like a plan B that looks palatable
Okay.
anyway, and
Yeah.
hopefully attractive kind of thing. And then, and then a plan C and so forth. So, what that looks like for me is I right now well, and also I guess I should say there was a mountaineering mentor of mine a long time ago that said, never make a decision from inside the tent. And what that means is when you're in the tent, you're
Mhm.
sort of, you're in the tent, you're looking out at the weather, and you're like, oh my gosh, the weather looks horrible out there. We
Mhm.
should like stay in here and let's just like go back to bed and wake up tomorrow and head back down the mountain kind of thing. So like never make a decision inside the tent. You got to kind of like at least stick a head out of the tent and maybe.
That's a great, yeah. In other words,
So
there's always going to be a little bit of action. You've always got to
yeah,
be just,
yeah. And
wow.
so now I think that's that's what we're beginning to do. We're beginning to be like, okay, let's unzip the tent and
Mhm.
stick our head out,
Yeah.
and maybe it's time to go out and take a pee anyway. So let's go
Yeah.
take a pee and see what what things look like out there. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm starting to hear from various climbers that want to put some things together. Plus, I had to cancel my Peruvian climbing season, so I'm trying to work with my climbers to see about objectives we can tackle closer to home.
Okay.
And so developing, okay, plan A is not going to work. What's the plan B that we can work toward that's more palatable and is
Right.
workable? And so that's what it's looked like in my world. What's it look like in your world?
Well, for me, it's a couple things. I mean, obviously, it's the fact that here we are online rather than doing virtual or live things.
Yeah.
So now we're in the virtual world more than the live world. Having time to sit and write and consider and maybe read some new things or maybe broaden my horizons. Also, really appreciating the in the tent experience. That whole being the frog and just
Yeah.
being quiet or meditating, watching TV, walking my dog, just being really present with what is and not trying to fight the reality of the moment.
Mhm.
And kind of knowing that I had this conversation a little bit earlier today with another one of my guests about this idea that every ending is also a beginning, right? There's nothing that ends and then just it's all over unless you're dying, right? So there's going to be another new beginning. So are you focusing on the fact that it's an end or a beginning? So I'm trying to focus on the fact that it is a beginning. It's like, yeah, so maybe I spent all my time developing, climbing a mountain up to a certain point, developing a certain skill set for a particular purpose. And now that skill set maybe needs to be modified in order for me to, kind of move forward with my life. So instead of being like, oh, I can't believe I spent all this time learning how to do this, it's
Mhm.
like, okay, well, there was a time when that was new. So now this something else is going to be new.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
what it looks like for me is the sense
Yeah.
of It's new. It's an adventure. There's a lot of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not upset about. I mean, I'm sad for people who are suffering, but I'm not upset about the limitations in my own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful that that's the way I feel. I feel like my preparation is paying off.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Good.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'll kind of
Yeah.
wait and see. And by the way, I'm just noticing we've actually come to the end of our time together. Believe it or not, I know this is crazy. We've been talking for like pretty solid half hour, and I always try to keep this to 20 to 30 minutes, and I want to respect our listeners. So yeah, get the hook. But we should do it again sometime. And here's what I would like to do right now, though, is how could people know more about you, maybe know more about the work you do, or how they could kind of enter your world? I think would be great.
Yeah.
People wonder.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, both to talk a little bit here, and I
Yeah.
think talking is always a great way for me to think through my, and I guess learn from my own thoughts. And so, thanks for that opportunity. And now, as far as what I've been up to while we've all been hunkered down, I have been working on the website, which is www.adventurespiritguides.com, and so if folks were interested in learning more about what Adventure Spirit Guides does, the website is looking really sharp. Some wonderful new photos, some great new informational pages, that sort of thing. And so that's what I've been up to, which I think is the question you asked, but now I'm losing track of it. Okay. All right. And I would hope to hear from everybody later this summer as we begin to venture outside the tent and explore the power of adventure and nature and all that it can offer. I'd love to be a part of that process with people.
Love it. That's great stuff. So say the website one more time.
All right. It's www.adventurespiritguides.com. So that's all one word, and it's guides plural.
Yeah.
Adventure
Okay.
Spirit Guides.
Yeah. That's fabulous. And the website does look great, by the way.
Oh, hey, all right, cool. You checked it out. Yeah.
Oh, of course.
All right.
So this is awesome. Any final words that you'd like to leave everyone with, or?
Ooh. Climb on.
All right, man. It's the metaphor is great. It's such a great metaphor. Guys, listen, it's been such a pleasure, getting to know Kel here a little bit. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. We're definitely going to explore doing some things together in the future, and maybe, getting on another one of these kind of things. So check him out. Check out my newest book, Bulletproof, which is available on Amazon right now. You can get the Kindle version for 99 cents for the next few days. Or just buy the book. And join my mailing list, which is bestofsteve.com. Go to bestofsteve.com. If you pop on there, you'll get a free chapter of the book to get you started. So that's what's going on here in our world. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Kel, thanks so much for your time. Stick around for a couple minutes after I click this thing off.